Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. On today's episode of the Total Podcast, I have a very special guest. I've watched her on television for many years, and now I finally get to interview her. Her name is Elsa Sevilla. She is the host of Historic Places with Elsa Sevilla on KPBS here in San Diego. And without further delay, here's Elsa. So, hello, Elsa. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. It is an honor, and I truly appreciate you coming on.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for having me and for asking me to be on the podcast. This is awesome.
Well, you're very welcome. Like I said, it's an absolute honor to have you on. So, Elsa, if you would, I know you've recently written a book, so we'll get into that later on. So, if you would, tell the listeners about your background, where you were born, where you went to school, because it's a fascinating story. So, tell us about your background and then tell us how you got started into television, how you started your own production company, which is huge, and we'll just build from there. So,
Yeah.
I'll just let you have at it.
All right. That sounds great. That's a loaded question in a way, right? There's so much to talk about. But I was born in Tijuana, Mexico, across the border. And when we were 5 years old, my father had a severe accident in San Diego where he nearly died. And
Um,
so we were uprooted from Mexico to come to San Diego so that we could be with him and care for him. He was in intensive care for several months because he, in the accident, had a fractured skull. And the doctors told my mom that if he wasn't going to survive, but if he did, that he would probably be in a vegetative state. And so I was 5 years old when that happened. And so we were uprooted from Mexico and we had to come to San Diego. And then we moved to Orange County so that my dad was transported to Orange County where my grandparents and my uncles lived, and they were also able to care for him. We stayed up there for several months. I think it was about a year. Then we came back to San Diego. And my parents were able to buy a house in Southeast San Diego, and that's where we grew up. And I remember in first grade, I had a moment where I was learning how to speak English, and I felt very isolated, very out of place in San Diego as a young child. But in first grade, when our first grade teacher was reading, would do circle time and hold up the book and turn the pages and point to the photos and the images on the book, I fell in love with storytelling. And years later, in I think it was fifth or sixth grade, I had my first epiphany that one day this voice in my head said, "In one day you will become a writer." And I thought to myself, like, oh, okay. Writing sounds interesting. I'm interested in writing, but like what kind of writer would I be? An author? That'd be so complicated. And that was that. And then a year or two later in seventh grade, my mom and I were just chatting, probably in the kitchen table, and she mentioned to me, I'm wondering if you should go into be a radio announcer. Your teachers say that you're very social in class and that, you enjoy talking to people and stuff like that. And this light bulb went on, and I'm like, that sounds really interesting. I really would like to do that. And then in a split second, I said to her, I'd love to do that. That sounds great, but I want to be on TV. I want people to see me and know who I am. I don't know where that came from, but it just came. And so from that moment on, I started to think about like, what can I do to start planning to be a journalist? I want to be a journalist on TV. And little by little in high school, I was on the high school newspaper writing articles. And then in college, I was the photo editor for the newspaper. And we also did some communications and some, news segments. And little by little, I started to work on, how to get to my career. I did two internships, one at NBC San Diego, and then a few years later, one at C-SPAN. And so from a very young age, I fell in love with storytelling. And in my teens, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And here I am 35 years later, producing documentaries, created our Sevilla Productions company that produces the documentaries for PBS. And so, in a nutshell, that's how I got into TV.
Now, one thing that just I love it when questions just kind of pop in my head as we go along. So, in those early years, and even in the later years, you were a mom and you juggled your work. So, how was that process like for you, and how did you balance the two?
Being a mom was like a wonderful experience, but I remember people telling me like, being a mom, that's going to turn your life upside down. And I thought, no, I've taken care of my nephews. I can handle it. But yeah, they were right. It turns your life upside down in the best way possible. And juggling, children, going to school, doctor appointments, homework, and all sorts of stuff, and trying to work, and not only just trying to work, but creating a business production company was extremely challenging. What was really great is I was doing what I loved, which was storytelling and picking these amazing stories that I was just curious about. And the other thing that was really great was the flexibility. I think as a parent, one or the other has to have some flexibility to be able to run the kids to school, pick them up, and in between work, and then do dinner, and then, oh, let me finish up some stuff before we go to sleep and that kind of stuff. So it was great, but it was hard. I think nothing great, anything great in life is a lot of hard work, and you
Right.
also never do it alone, right? If it's great work that you've been able to do something fantastic, there's always a team, there's always a group of people that are helping, supporting you. And so I've been able to work with my partner, Guillermo Sevilla. We met at Channel 10 in 1990 and we became best friends. And then a little bit more than that. And then we got married and had kids, but we've always worked together. He's a videographer, director of photography, and we've been able to, really work well together. I think we complement each other super well because he loves storytelling through video and sound and images, and I love telling stories through facts, information, unique stories, and obviously historic photos, which is one of the things that I really, really love about history, but also the impact that history has on us. And a lot of people don't realize that history gives us confidence, it gives us identity. And for me, moving from Mexico to San Diego at such a young age, I lost my identity. And it took me years to find it again. I was able to find it through my partner, Guillermo, who has a lot of, he grew up in a very tight-knit family with a lot of traditions. And then I also was able to find that identity through a volunteer group, Mana de San Diego, who have been the women in Mana have been like my sisters. They uplifted me. They showed me how to be proud of my heritage and not be embarrassed of it. Because when we moved to San Diego in the 70s, there were rough times and we weren't welcome in the neighborhood. I remember our teenage neighbor asking me just a few months after we moved in, like, when are you moving out? When are you and your family moving out?
Mm,
And so when you're young, you feel isolated and unwelcome. So having to lose your identity, knowing that you're not welcomed, it's hard to climb out of that. And it took a lot of years and a lot of hard work. But I do credit that having a community of, people who support you, who want to see you succeed, following your passion, and just finding the answers to all of this and finding yourself again, your identity, loving yourself, allows you to bring it all together and live a good life, because I think that's what we all want to do.
absolutely. And if you would walk me through a little bit of your time at Channel 10 and then the transition to KPBS and then doing the show.
Yeah, it's a great question. So Channel 10 was a dream job. It was my first job out of college from San Diego State. It was the third job that I applied. I applied to two radio stations. I didn't get an interview. And then I applied to Channel 10 and I got an interview. And I'm like, okay, great. And I didn't get a call back. I didn't get a call back, waiting. Finally, they called me back. And my first job was the assistant to the assignment editor. And that meant taking phone calls from the public and listening to the police scanners for stories and just looking through the papers and everything else, looking for stories so that the reporters can do the story for the evening newscast. And my job was also to research the story, find people that would be experts, that would be the best person to tell the story. And so that's how I started. And it wasn't easy. It was hard work, but it was the best school that I ever had. They gave me the foundation to become a journalist and to follow my passion of storytelling. And so a year into the job at Channel 10, I asked, can I start doing feature stories? And to my surprise, they said yes. And so here I am scrambling, trying to figure out, how do I write the story? How do I put it together? And the good thing was that I worked with the photographers, and so they were able to give me some tips. I worked with the reporters, and they were able to give me some tips. And little by little, you start learning. It's not easy. And being a first generation student in San Diego, and an English learner, the grammar was never easy for me, even though I love storytelling and writing, but the grammar was really hard. Little by little, I started to learn how to, clean up the grammar and how to tell the story. And it was always, clear, concise, and just make sure that the viewer understands a story, and you have 30 seconds to tell it, or you have a minute and a half to tell it. So little by little, I began to learn and get some experience. And I was there for about 18 years altogether. I left for a couple years and came back. But then after 18 years and then of reporting, I was like, I need something different. I want something more sort of more meaningful, more impactful. The stories that we were doing, in news, they're great because they inform people, but at the same time there was also a lot of tragedy, a lot of crime that we had to cover, and it's hard to cover that year in, year out. And so I went to KPBS and checked to see if they had any possibility, any openings or anything like that, and they didn't have anything for storytelling short format, but they did have a little bit of funding for documentaries, and that's how Historic Places was born. Little by little we started to do, I think the first year we did like 4 documentaries. Then we were doing 12 a year, which was extremely crazy, and raising young children. And my partner was working full time and I was working part time. But little by little, we started to do 6 documentaries a year. And what was great about it was that I was always, doing stories that I thought were super interesting. And in the beginning, I thought, will people watch? Will people like the show? We had no idea. This was the first time we were doing it. And so we started little by little, and people started watching and liking it and telling us that they really enjoyed the show because they were learning about San Diego history they didn't know about. And I was too at the same time. I was following stories that I thought were interesting, and I was learning along the way. So that's how, Channel 10, and then moved over to KPBS.
Now, doing the show, what have been for you some of the most memorable aspects of doing the show and just all the different places around town and around the county that you've had a chance to visit? What things just off the top of your head kind of stand out for you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them, right? Out of 85 documentaries, there's some really cool stories that we produced, but I think one of the most memorable has to be the 6 episodes we produced on the first people of the Kumeyaay Nation, that are the indigenous people that have lived for millennia here in San Diego in this region. I didn't know their history growing up. I never read it in the books, in the history books. And so when I came across it, I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I was already in my 40s. And so I started to dig and learn more about their history. And as I did the mission history, I uncovered their history because the Spanish came to this region and overtook the territory from the Kumeyaay. And so I did multiple episodes on missions, and those were really interesting episodes. But I thought to myself, I'm not telling the story of the indigenous people, and so it took me a year to get the trust from the Kumeyaay people in this region before they could trust me and tell me their story. And I thought it was very important to get the story from their perspective, right? Because there's always different perspectives. And so after a year of meeting with them, they felt comfortable, and we produced 6 episodes. But not only was it an honor to tell their story, because I learned so much of their history that I didn't know about, that was never in the history books, but it also helped me connect to my ancestors. When I was interviewing them and, talking about their story, it allowed me to feel connected to my ancestors and connect to my identity. And so I think that's one of the most memorable. So not only did I connect to my identity, but I was able to be more confident, live with purpose. And that's the message that I tell people all the time. It's like you have to connect to history so that you know who you are, where you came from, where you're going. And that's definitely one of the most memorable. I wouldn't say episode because we did 6 episodes on them, and it was great.
Well, in high school and in college, my favorite subject was U.S. history. And so when I come across programs like yours, anything historical, I'm really fascinated and just enthralled by what I learn. Has there been anything when you've done all of the shows that you've done, has there been anything or maybe a couple of things that just stunned you about what you've learned about an historical fact or so about San Diego or the people here in San Diego that you were just
Yeah.
stunned to learn?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the first people of the Kumeyaay. I didn't know that they had been here for millennia. I didn't know that they were still here. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't know, that the San Diego indigenous group of the Kumeyaay were the only indigenous group that were never completely overtaken by the Spanish in 1769. A lot of them went to the East County and to the mountains to escape the Spanish. But a lot of the other indigenous groups throughout California were not as fortunate. A lot of them came under the mission system. So here in San Diego, it's really unique that the Spanish came to San Diego, and it's the first city that they came to in what was Alta California, now California. So there's so many stories that really stand out. Another one that I didn't know about, and this is sort of cross-border. I had a friend who had a friend, and he was Korean Mexican, but he spoke Spanish like I did because I grew up in Tijuana, partly in Tijuana and San Diego. So I know what the accent sounds like. And when I heard him speak, I thought, wait, you're Korean and you speak Spanish like we do in Tijuana. So my brain was going like, what is going on? And so I asked him, and he's like, and he told me the story. He told me the story of how Koreans were escaping the war in their country in the 1800s, and there was a worker program in Yucatan, Merida, in Mexico, and so they came to work this under really harsh conditions, and a lot of them stayed in Mexico, and then they got married and had kids, and so many of them came to Tijuana, and then came to San Diego. And so I think we only did a segment on that story. And that is definitely one of the ones that stands out as well, just because it's so unique. I'd love to look at something that's so unique that people don't know about because it really makes an impact and people remember that. And that's what I love about the storytelling because I'm always very selective on what I want to choose to do a story on and to share that with San Diego and everyone else. And I learned that at Channel 10. Always look for the unique stories that haven't been told and look for a unique angle and how it impacts people. And I apply it to the stories for historic places.
Now, Elsa, tell us about your book. What motivated you to finally write it? And just tell us about the background and just give us a little teaser about what's in the book because I'm looking forward to reading it myself. So let us in.
Awesome. Yeah, actually, I have a copy of it, and it
Okay.
is camera ready from Hardship to the Spotlight. And the hardship obviously is my father's accident and being uprooted from Mexico and coming to San Diego, and how we struggled to fit in and how we were determined to get ahead. I remember being maybe 7, 8 years old and thinking, knowing that we were struggling, and the change from Mexico to the US was very different. And it really left an impact on me. And so I might have been about 7, 8 years old, and I thought to myself, one day I will do something meaningful with my life that will impact my community in a positive way. And I learned to follow the instinct. I was determined to get ahead, and I fell into my passion of storytelling, and that all came together. And that's been my life for the last, almost 60 years. But what prompted me to write a book was that producing historic places, it really connects you to your roots, and you really think about where you come from, where you've been, and where you're going. And so we are wrapping up historic places. And I thought, what a great way to sort of end historic places and write a book, camera ready to from hardship to the spotlight. And I also wanted to do more screenings of historic places in the community, do more speaking engagements. And so I go to universities, events, and I do book signings and talk about how history impacts us in such a powerful way and allows us to live with purpose. And so it was a combination of all of that, bringing it all together. And, all of my work of 35 years from starting at Channel 10 in 1990 to the present and putting it all down. And it was really I wasn't expecting everything I felt, all the emotions that came when I was writing the book and when I was finished. I have told people stories for 35 years, and you're never part of the story as a journalist. It's always the people's stories that you're telling. And so it was tough to write this book because, again, it's never been about me. It's always been about the story. But it was also an incredible feeling to have it completed. And it's finally sinking in. It's been 6 weeks since it's been published. And it's sinking in like, oh my gosh, yes, I put it all together. I wrote it. And it's a big process. And so to have it done and published and out, and people are buying it and reading it, and what's really neat about it is that people are coming up to me and saying, that's what I went through. That's what I felt. And I felt the same thing that you did. And that's really neat because you get to connect with people. And I'm finding that our stories are so powerful. And I knew this, obviously, for I was doing this for 35 years, but I didn't realize how powerful my story would be. And so the book is about the journey that I've taken, obviously, from the hardship that we had as very young children and having to adjust to a new life, and not only adjust, but to thrive and get ahead. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to accomplish so much. I wanted to be a TV journalist. I now have my own production company, my own TV show, and now I'm an author and doing speaking engagements. And I always tell the young kids in college or, fresh out of college is like dream big because your dreams do come true. And so that's what the book is about.
Now, what has been the feedback from when you go out and you do these speaking engagements and you run into people who've read your book? What's been the feedback for you? And I would think that it's been incredible.
Yeah, I so some of it is the first part, the second chapter, I think it's like second, third, fourth chapter where I talk about the hardship, my father's accident and moving to the US almost overnight, where we didn't get to say goodbye to, people in the neighborhood, to our school, kids in the school and stuff like that. So when you don't have closure like that and you leave abruptly and you come to a different country, and you're a first generation student, we hear those words, but when you live through it day in, day out, you know the struggles, you know the hardship, you know how hard you've had to you've had to be so brave and strong to overcome all that and surpass that. And so the reaction from people, it's been great because I've been in the community for such a long time, 35 years. Aside from being a journalist, a storyteller, and filmmaker, I volunteered with Mana de San Diego for the last 30 years, and I volunteered in other places. So it's interesting because I'm sort of surprised, pleasantly surprised. It's like, there's a lot of adulation from people because they've known me for such a long time. And so it's been very positive. They talk about how sad, those chapters are when I talk about my father's accident. And then they also talk about how they can relate to a lot of it because I think so many of us have gone through those same things. And if you don't talk about it, you don't know that other people have gone through the same thing. And so writing this book has been an amazing experience that I didn't expect to have. It's amazing because when people read the book, and especially if they're younger, they can identify with what I went through and say, if she went through it, I'm not alone. And knowing that somebody else has gone through it really gives you sort of a support system that you can get ahead as well. And so that's what I love about writing the book, that it empowers our stories, but it also empowers the community, the people who read it, because they can take from my experiences, just like I take from people in history. That's why I love history. There's, so many people that have overcome so much and have done so much, accomplished so much. I'll give you one example, one story that I love to tell of Margaret Robinson from Julian, California, which is 30 minutes, 45 minutes from San Diego. In the 1800s, she's a Black woman who starts a bakery, then a restaurant, and then she marries her husband, Albert, and they start the Robinson Hotel. That Robinson Hotel is the Julian Hotel today that people love. And they started it. This was a Black couple in the 1800s, that in those days, it was hard to own property, especially for people of color and women. And so they accomplished so much, a bakery, a restaurant, and a hotel. So I learned from that history because they empower me. And that's why I'm passionate about talking about history. Because when you hear these stories, you learn about other people's resilience, their struggles, and their adaptability, and how they were able to overcome and do incredible things.
Well, I think because you've written your book and you've done so much for the community of San Diego, just with your storytelling and with all of your hard work that you've put into it these past 30 plus years, I think listeners and readers of your book will be rewarded nicely for hearing your story. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Elsa. And if you would, tell us your social media. And before you do that, just in about a minute, what does the future look like for you? What do you want to do in the future?
The future looks bright. I'm really happy. I am looking forward to speaking engagements, selling my book signings. We had several events already, and it was exciting. This is all new to me, but it was really exciting and a lot of fun. And so we have several screenings already scheduled, and we have events scheduled for the next few months, all the way up to October. So the calendar is filling up quick, and it's very exciting. I'm happy to be talking to universities. I'll be at San Diego State University talking to the journalism department, media studies. And so that's really exciting. And for people who want to get a hold of me, Sevilla Productions is probably the easiest way. All my social media is there, and they can sign up for events as well and check out the latest things that we're doing. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube, and sevillaproductions.com is the easiest way to find me. And for my book, it's on Amazon, and it's also on Barnes and Noble online. And they can order the book and it comes straight to them, or they can join me at a speaking event or a book signing event. They can email me if they'd like me to come out, if they have a group of people that'd love to hear about history and how history empowers us, and buy my book.
Thank you, Elsa. Well, I hope to do this again with you sometime because I could talk to you all day. This has just been amazing. So, Elsa, I truly appreciate you coming on the podcast today. It's been, like I said, an honor for me to meet you and to have you on. And thank you so much for sharing with my listeners your story and just for thank you so much for doing historic places over the years. It's been amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been great chatting with you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you so much. So, with that, everyone, that is the end of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Everyone, stay safe, be careful out there, take care of one another, and we will talk again soon.